Hello everyone, and welcome to the first ever online Meet Magento. Give me a thumbs up in the chat to make sure that you can hear me and that you're engaged. I'm Rebecca Brockton, your hostess with the mostest merchant content for you today. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to a bunch of amazing speakers on this merchant track. So our first speaker of the day is Strategy and Insight Director at IMRG, Andy Mulcahy, with his session, What Impact Did COVID Have on Online Retail? So let's find out. Welcome, Andy, and thank you for being part of Meet Magento UK.
Great, yeah, thanks a lot, Rebecca. COVID, you've probably heard of COVID, I suspect. And the question here is, what impact has it had on online retail? I'll just let you work that in your head for a few minutes to see if you think it has had an impact, and then we'll answer that as we're going through here. So just to introduce myself onto the next slide. So I'm Strategy and Insight Director at IMRG. If you don't know what IMRG is, we are the trade association for online retail in the UK. So the main thing that we do is we track lots and lots of data. So we have about 200 retailers in our panel who give us their sales data every week. And we then show them where they're doing well and where they're not. And we get a lot of performance stuff across their websites as well. So we know things like checkout abandonment rates or add to basket rates, bounce rates on various pages. We have this all across the website. So we run a series of studies as well, where we look at those that have got a relatively low rate and those that have got a relatively high rate. And then we make an assessment of what kind of structure of page seems to lend itself to good conversion at that stage of the site. So there's a whole load of stuff. And by the way, if you wanted to participate in any of the metrics that we track, it's actually free to do. You just get in touch with us and tell us which ones you want to do. Give us your figure and we give you the benchmark back. You'll also see at the bottom now I have something of a side project, which is Post-Economic Institute. And that, I know it sounds like massively hysterical, like a sort of agency term that's trying to grab attention or something, but I actually mean post-economic. It's a theory that I have that means I think we should move the determination of value away from interactions between business and individual to the outcome. Massively complicated, but if you're interested in something slightly more alternative, then go and have a look at that. So back into the here and now, though. Come on to the first slide. This is just to give you an indication of what we kind of do. So I mentioned that we track lots and lots of data. We do our index with Capgemini. We launched this tool at the beginning of the year. And what this enables you to do is look at the data that we've got there. So that's showing you the year-on-year sales growth for all the retailers that we've got over a sort of 12-month period. But on the right-hand side are a series of filters. So you can say, I just want to see retailers that are fashion, that are sort of medium size, that have this kind of average basket value, etc. So the line that you end up seeing is one that's only got a few retailers in it that are very specific to the area that you're trading in. And there's all sorts of functionality that you can use there. And if you wanted to join that, by the way, there's a free trial running until the end of June. So get in touch if you wanted to do that. Now into what we're looking at. Next slide. So where were we? We're talking about COVID here, but I think it's important just to look at the online retail market where we were before all this stuff happened, because it really wasn't a very happy place. And I've got some charts to show you that. So on to the next one. For 2019, which is the last year we have the full data for, obviously, the market was up 6.7%. So overall growth in online sales was 6.7%. When we say online sales, by the way, it's online retailers, but also multi-channel retailers. So anybody who sells online is eligible for us to track their sales. And as you can see with those bars there, some of the most of the years were quite a lot higher than 2019. Actually, 2019 was by some distance the lowest that we've actually seen. 2018 was kind of the year that things started to change, and I'm going to explain a bit more on that in just a second. So on to the next slide, and we'll see in slightly more detail what happened in 2019. So this is just to give you an indication of where the sort of demand was quite strong leading into the pandemic. So you can see that health and beauty, it's had a pretty good few years, to be honest. And look down the other side, electrical and garden, and keep those numbers in mind, by the way, for when we get into the impact that COVID has had and see some of the ways that this stuff has turned around. Home and footwear, an interesting one to keep an eye on as well. And then if you look on the right-hand side there, health and beauty is one where we think something that's going on here is the fact that it lends itself rather well, that product category, to the sort of modern technology. So if you've ever internally been given a job to go and create some clever AR device, but you're not too sure how to do that with some staples that you sell. If you imagine in beauty, you've got these, a lot of beauty retailers have these kind of apps where you can try the tone on your face and things like that. So it's quite a good, obvious way for this technology to be used. And also subscription boxes are quite popular as well. So we think that technology might be giving that a bit of a boost there. And then look at electricals, not having a good time, hasn't done for a few years. And it's just got stuck in this kind of discount mania, really. And we think that's something that's played on there. As I say, keep that in mind when we look at the COVID bit. So on to the next slide. Now, this is just to give you a bit more detail on how things were going in 2019 before all this stuff happened. So if you look at that blue line, that is 2019, and it's online sales growth for each month of the year in 2019. And it was really quite bad. So I think our forecast was for growth of about 9–10%. And actually came in at 6.7%. So not very good. But if you look at the middle of the year, between sort of April and August, September, it was really quite bad, and it was frequently below 5%. So not really a very good performance at all. And then November sort of artificially inflated the performance. Black Friday in 2019 was just off the scale. It was something we really didn't think would happen. If you look at where that trend line was going, and then suddenly a massive boost. People just went crazy for it. So November and December sort of artificially inflated the figure for the year. But then if you trace that line onto the orange one, which is 2020 online sales growth, you can see that in January and February, it was completely flat. And this isn't a small sample we're doing here. As I say, it's about 210 retailers we've got in there. It's a sample for the year of about 23 billion that we get from those retailers. So it's a massive sample. And there was no growth in the first couple of months of the year. And that's before the pandemic hit. And then in March, we actually saw a dip. And there was a slightly tidal effect, I think, when we first all got told to go home. I think we were in panic stations, really, and people didn't really want to spend any money. Hence, you get that dip. But then look what happened in April and May. April was the strongest we'd seen in 10 years. May was the strongest we've seen in 12 years. So there's something very strange that's happened, but it wasn't quite where we were going leading into this. So moving on to the next slide. This is just to give you an idea of some of the problems really that we've had that have led to that. So retail wasn't in a good place. You know that the high street has been under pressure, but online wasn't doing well either. And there's myriad reasons really. And I've just listed 6 here. You could possibly add some more in. But the top one there to start with, I had to get it in there, Brexit. Now, whatever you think about Brexit, the thing that it did for business is it sort of it tightened up investment. It's difficult to make the decision on what to do if you think there's a bit of uncertainty coming down the road. So that obviously has impacted on businesses' capacity to really develop the experience that they're given and really invest in new technology. Shopper confidence took a hit, and particularly in 2018, I said that was the year where I think things took a bit of a turn, and it was because you saw some big retailers collapse in that year. House of Fraser is really the best example I can give you, because when they went into administration, there were a lot of people who had bought things from them who then couldn't pick them up, and they couldn't return them, and they couldn't get the warranty on it and things like that. And the media really picked up on that and pushed it around a lot. So I think that really dented confidence that people have. And because there were so many bad news stories around where retailers were looking to close stores or maybe a few job losses and things like that, it spooks people a bit, and they think, well, I shouldn't buy from them then because I might not be able to collect my good or get it returned to me. So that's problematic. And then the next one, stuck in discounting. Of course, when times get tough and people are a little bit hesitant with their spend, you fall into discounting. Are we about to head into a really bad one of that now, with so much stock unsold for some groups of retailers and people under so much economic pressure? And then spend on other areas. This is a possibility. I think we keep getting told that that people are not buying quite so much anymore, and they're interested in experiences and stuff. I think it's a possibility. I've yet to see the really hard bit of data that says that is comprehensively a fact that that's happening, but it's a possibility. There's a lack of new technology, by which I mean devices, really. So if I was to overlay device sales onto the year-on-year growth that I showed you from 2009 to 2019, you would see that when a device becomes significant, which means that people started buying quite a lot through tablet devices and smartphone devices, you get a boost in growth. It's very, very clear. And the reason for that is because it adds new context for people to shop. So when the tablet became quite a big device for shopping, it meant that beforehand you had the lunchtime and 7 o'clock in the evening were the sort of peaks for traffic to online sites. And the tablet added the evening, so 9 to 10 in front of the TV with the tablet. So it was a new way to carry on doing shopping that wasn't there before, hence you get more sales. And a smartphone did the same for the morning commute. And indeed, just anywhere you are, you can obviously shop. So we thought that the next thing would be the voice assistant, but it hasn't really done anything in retail yet. I'm not saying it won't. I think there's a lot of investment from some very big tech companies in it, but it hasn't kicked in yet. When it does it, we might see something change. And last but certainly not least, there is the environment. All the stuff that's been going on there has been headline news for a long time. And whether you're behind it or you think it's a load of rubbish or whatever, the pressure really is on retailers to sort out things like the amount of plastic packaging they use, and the emissions that they create, how their stuff is manufactured, and what happens to it afterwards, disposal-wise. It's a big, big deal. And I do think that's probably one that's really exerted a pressure on it. So COVID, for how terrible and disruptive and awful it's been, it has rather set the reset button, I think, on us needing to change retail. And, there may be some positive that comes out of it in that respect. So moving on now to the next slide, looking at what COVID has actually done. And the big thing to understand is what it's done to demand in retail. And on to the next slide. We can see some of the categories that we are tracking. Now, if I draw your attention to the first half of that graph, first of all, that's showing you the year-on-year sales growth for various categories. So clothing is blue, footwear is grey, those two that go down. Electrical, health and beauty, and home are the ones that shoot up. But the first half of that graph you can see, so that's January to May 2020. The general sort of range for growth, and it changes week by week. You do get fluctuations. It's sort of -20 to +20, depending on what week you're in. And that it doesn't go much outside of that usually, really. And then COVID hit, so in the middle of March there, look what happens with those with that demand. Clothing and footwear absolutely fell off a cliff. And if you look at the scale there for the y-axis, you can see that that's down sort of 40-50% for those categories. And then it's kind of gradually gone back up again, but still been in negative. So even though retailers had their stores closed, clothing and footwear demand didn't translate to online. It just hasn't been there. Electrical, health and beauty, home, I was to put some other things in there like beers, wines and spirits. Garden at one point was up 288%. So bearing in mind when I showed you the sector growth for 2019, garden was not having a good time, and now it's absolutely off the scale because we're all at home. So it's done something very strange to demand. When is that going to settle down is kind of a question. If you go on to the next slide, I could just give you some year-to-dates. So beauty year-to-date 42%, with things like boots have been open, but you're not really supposed to go in there and buy deodorant and perfume. You go in there to get your drugs and your essentials. So that's kind of translated to online, frequent purchase, regular top-ups. Is that then going to stay in people's behaviour? I think it's a really strong possibility. Beers, wines and spirits, what else are we going to do at home? And garden, as I say, so these are the year-to-date, so that's January to May, 138% for garden so far. So lots been going on there. But look at clothing and particularly footwear. Footwear has been having a torrid time. That's year-to-date, January to May, down 20%. Now the stores are opening up again. Are people going back to them? I mean, there was that initial flurry on Monday, wasn't there? But I don't know. I just can't see that people are going to be happy to queue, day after day for an hour to get in the shop. I just can't see that. So what happens with demand now is the big thing that we're kind of keeping our eye on, really. Now, into the next slide. This bit here, I'm going to show you a slightly different data set that we've been tracking. So that is all hard data that we get directly from the retailers. Another thing that we do is we have a list of 300 retailers. So that's the retailers who are in our sample, and also the ones who aren't necessarily in our tracker, but are of a reasonable size and are therefore interesting to us. And every now and then, so we often do this in November over Black Friday, we take those 300 retailers and we look at their websites day by day. And we've been doing it over the coronavirus outbreak. Every week, we've been looking at the 300 to see what they've been doing on their websites. So are they in discount? What kind of changes have they made to their proposition, returns, delivery, all that sort of thing? And then we note that down, and that enables us to cross-reference some of that stuff and see if some of these changes seem to suggest that's a good thing to do in order to boost your sales. So I'm going to show you a few things that we've been tracking here. So on to the next slide. First thing that we were looking at, and this rather spooked us, to be honest, when shops were first told to close, if you cast your mind back, it was non-essentials had to close, but online, and there was a little bit of confusion about this at first, online we were allowed to keep trading. So even if you're selling clothes or whatever, you were allowed to keep trading, but some weren't able to do that. So first of all, 5 points, they've been down for basically the whole time. So they actually just can't sell online. Homebase, they take theirs down from time to time just to cope with the demand that's going through the warehouse. Talk about that a bit more in just a second. So on to the next slide. This will show you how that changed over a period of time. So each of those bars represents a week. So the first bar that you see there, the dark blue one on the left-hand side, in the third week of March, when we all got locked down, so that week we said, okay, let's look at what's going on. There were only 2 of the 300 retailers we were looking at who suspended their online operation. And we thought, okay, that's not too bad. The next week when we looked at it, it had gone up to 19. And that was when we got a bit spooked, because we thought, this is a bit of a problem. It looks like retail might sort of fall over a bit here. But then as the weeks went by, actually it came down quite a bit, and it sort of stabilized over a period of time. That's not week after week necessarily each time. If you look at the final one there, which is June, second week of June, that was actually a month after we looked at it before, because it seemed like it had sort of leveled out and it was a bit boring to keep looking at. But there were only 4 basically the last time we looked at it, and now stores are kind of opening up again. On to the next slide, I'll just show you who those retailers are that have in our tracker that had been suspended. Oh no, sorry. This is one of the communications that you see going up on the website. So it was things like this is kind of the crux of the problem, right? So you can carry on trading, that's fine, because you're allowed to. But in warehouses, you have to put the social distancing in place, obviously. And some have sort of narrow gangways, and some warehouses are bigger than others. So it just means that it's more difficult to actually get these parcels out. And as we saw with the demand, some retailers have seen incredible spikes in demand, which they say is a bit like Black Friday, more or less every day, and they're having to deal with it with a skeleton crew. So hence some weren't able to do it, and some, I think, they wouldn't necessarily say this, but I'd really get the impression there was a bit of a revolt in some warehouses, and people saying, look, why are we having to do this with non-essential stuff when we're kind of risking ourselves? So retailers had to do this and come out and say, well, this is the strict stuff that we've put in place, and that did seem to, in most cases, get through it. On to the next slide. So these are the ones as of where are we? Last week, I think, that are still suspended. So 5 points covers Fulton umbrellas, and then Liberty London was down, but actually it was because they had launched a new website, so they hadn't actually suspended. But we included them on here anyway. And on to the next slide, I can show you over the course of the 3 months that we've been doing this, the ones that went down and then reactivated their online trading. So there they all are. Some very big names in there. Dunelm, Next, Shoe, Homebase, Moss Bros, that went down and then they came back up again. Some of them were down just for a few days. Some were down for weeks. Some were down for months. So it's been a very difficult time. And there was a bit of negotiation to be done in order to get up and running again. But most of them are back up now. So on to the next slide. This is something that became really quite prominent as well, which was this putting a Corona message on the homepage. Right, that is who you think it is. Incidentally, she has her own clothing brand called Setting. And some would put it in the sort of homepage content. So this is our COVID statement. Some would put it in the footer. Some would have it. The All Saints one there is the most common, really. Along the top of the page, it says, we're still here for you. We're doing this. There's a bit of a delay to delivery. So that was a very common thing to do. On to the next slide, we'll show how many were actually doing this. So again, this is us looking at it over a period of time. How many had that corona message on the website? And it started out with just over a third of the 300, and then it went up quite a lot, reached a peak of about 260. And then it's actually come down a bit since then, as you can see, but it hasn't dropped away very much. And the interesting thing about these corona message boards is that they started out being the coronavirus is here, which you kind of knew, and we are still trading. You can still buy from us. And then it changed into, we've got these restrictions, we've got these things in our warehouse so that we've put these policies in place so you can be sure that we're protecting our staff. And now it's kind of changed to, our stores are opening again, and this is what we're doing in store to deal with that. And it's interesting to see that it's changed as a communication platform. The nature of it has changed. But having that kind of statement up there seems to be something they're very reluctant to remove in most cases. It's interesting to speculate how long it will actually stay up there. On to next slide. In those COVID statements, something that you quite often saw was our deliveries are slowing down a little bit because of the social distancing in the warehouse, because of the unexpected peak, because the carriers didn't know there was going to be a peak here. So if on Black Friday, they'll bring in additional drivers, additional staff in the warehouse. They didn't do it this time because they didn't know this would happen. So therefore, deliveries just slowed down. And if you see there, the first third week of March, when we first started looking at it, not many were saying that, 30, 40. And then it really kind of went up as time went by. And then there was a big gap between the brown one, and the grey one, which was the second week of May to the second week of June when we last looked at it. And there was actually quite a big increase there. So now over 2/3 of them are saying that deliveries are slower. It's going to be more like up to 7 days that you're going to see them. You're going to receive them. So onto the next slide, we just break that down into slightly more detail. So this is showing you over that period of time, how many were saying deliveries may be delayed and it may take up to 7 days for you to receive your order. And the orange one is saying, the ones that are saying how it may take longer than 7 days. So quite often 7 to 10 days, but sometimes, I've seen up to 24, 28 days that they were saying. So the kind of good news, if you like, is that the orange bar has come down, but the blue bar has spiked rather a lot. So it doesn't look like delivery is going to speed up again really quickly at the moment because of all the social distancing challenges. So on to the next slide. As a result of that, what happened is that retailers had to kind of suspend their next day operations. So you see that message on the left-hand side there, next day currently suspended. Because we just can't do it. And looking at those 300, you may find this interesting. 53% of them have no next day offer. So 47% do have some kind of offer, whether it's paid or whatever it is. Of the whole 100%, 27% still had it available, and 20% had suspended it. So I think it's about 42% or something of those that could offer it did actually switch it off. So on to the next thing, and again, it's on to the next slide. Sorry. And it's interesting to think what might happen then with speed of delivery, because we're all locked down because we're in our houses more, and it seems that people are going to be working more flexibly once this is all sort of cleared up. It means more people are at home. So do you need really fast delivery, or could it be a few days? Because why would you pay for it if you've got the certainty of being at home? It's very interesting to think what might happen with that. Returns. This was such a big issue. We track returns at IMRG. It running at about 25% of everything that goes out across all categories, that is, gets returned. There is differentiation between sort of a home item and clothing in the rate, but it's a big problem. I know we don't like to call it a problem, but it's a problem. And then what happened is because COVID hit, a lot of retailers extended their returns policies. Over half of the ones that we were tracking had put an extension of some description in. And what that graph is showing you is 3 times we looked at it: first week of April, second week of April, third week of April, blue, orange, and grey bars, and how much they'd extended their policy to. So, for example, in week 1 of April, about 16, 17 retailers had extended their policies to 30 to 50 days. But what the interesting thing here is, and the complex one, by the way, the big bar on the right-hand side, that means that they had a message that wasn't easy to put into one of the other categories there. So it was things like, if you bought before this time, you can return up to this time. So it's just a bit complicated. And quite a few, by the way, had said a year, 365 days you can return. And look how many have done 100 to 200 days as well. But the interesting one here is if you look at the 30 to 50 days, you see that in the first week we looked at it, there were 16 or 17, and then it dropped, which you think, well, why would that happen? That doesn't quite make any sense. But look at what happens in 90 days. That had gone up quite a lot. And if we go on to the next slide, you can see what was kind of going on there. This is a complicated slide, I grant you, but this is that same information, but it's broken down by product category. Okay, so for example, what that's telling you there is that if you look at home and garden, somewhere in the middle there, roughly 7 of them had a sort of complex returns policy extension in place. But the interesting thing I want to draw your attention to is some of the ways that they had obviously looked at each other. So if you look at lingerie, 5 of the lingerie retailers had gone for 90 days. And in beauty, 4 of them had gone for 90 days. Now, it seems a little suspicious that so many lingerie retailers would go for the same policy. And I think what had happened is some of them had extended their policy to maybe 28 days, looked at their competitor, seen that they're doing 90 days, and then thought, okay, we'd better push that up as well. So that's kind of what's going on there. And can we now bring returns policies down, or are they kind of good being extended? Will people actually return something after 365 days? Will they remember to do that? I'm not really too sure about that. I think people tend to return stuff really in the first week or two. So interesting to see what might happen with return policies once, again, this is all settled down. And then the final thing I think I wanted to just show you here, next slide, is that this has become reasonably popular as well. So it's offering a discount to emergency service. So, you know, we had the clapping on Thursdays outside your house, and it was a very universal thing, I've got to say. So retailers responded by saying, we'll give you a certain percentage off, so 30% off in this case, and there's a blue light card that they can present to prove that they're an emergency service worker. And on to the next slide, we'll show you just how many had done that and what category they were in. So 32 in total of the 300 went for that and did an emergency service discount, so about 10% of them. And that's showing you by category which ones have done it. So, for example, 1 accessories company had done it, and 6 footwear retailers have done it. Now, the footwear and clothing ones, if you remember, the ones that got hit the hardest, and it was those that had the greater tendency to offer a kind of incentive to their customers to carry on buying stuff. Coincidence? Maybe, not sure. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, on to the next slide, I think that's me kind of done. It is. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you found that useful. You know, my contact is there if you wanted anything. I don't know if we have time for questions, Rebecca.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't quite have time for any questions, but I was going to ask if there's any way for them to contact you, and that email address is perfect. I also saw that you're on Twitter as well. So yeah, if those questions that you've got about this presentation, feel free to fire them over to Andy. And the recording of this presentation will be available after the event as well. So yeah, there's lots of resources for you. But there's lots of people thanking you in the chat, Andy. So thank you again. It was an amazing presentation. I actually wrote so many notes. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there that maybe I want to look at implementing as well as a merchant. So yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.